In 1948, Israel's Jews were forced into a fight for survival when the hours-old country was invaded by its neighboring Arab states immediately after declaring independence. Spoiler alert, the Jews won, and Israel's existence was secured, for the time being. But as a result of the war, 700,000 Palestinians were suddenly made homeless. Descendants remember it as the Nakba, or catastrophe. The prevailing Palestinian narrative of the Nakba is that Jews, who had no right to Arab land in Palestine to begin with, expelled Palestinian Arabs using force in a deliberate act of ethnic cleansing. What's the real story?
I think a lot of the misconception is that Jews decided after the Holocaust, okay, time to all just go to Palestine and kick everyone else out. And that's not what was happening before 48. There were families like mine who couldn't go to the United States, who couldn't go to other places where other refugees from Europe had gone. And where they went, the only place that was safe for them was the Mandate of Palestine. That's where Jews had been living.
Though the long-held dream of Zionism was jump-started by Jewish persecution in the late 19th century, for Israel's Jews in 1948, their fight was inseparable from the shadow of the Holocaust, which ended only 3 years earlier. In 1947, the United Nations came up with the Partition Plan for Palestine. This was a solution to transition mandatory Palestine under British rule into 2 separate states after the withdrawal of British troops. Partition was hardly ideal for either people, as both states were left with vulnerabilities, separated territories, and Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, designated as an international zone for 10 years. On the upside, the Jewish people's historical connection to much of the land would be preserved, and growing nationalism among Palestinian Arabs would be validated with a Palestinian Arab state. Revisionist Zionists, led by Menachem Begin, were fiercely opposed to a plan they felt diminished the biblical Jewish claim of the entirety of the land. Labor Zionists, led by David ben-Gurion and Chaim Weizmann, accepted the partition plan, seeing an opportunity to secure a small piece of the larger Zionist dream. Arab leadership was outraged. After 2 world wars, geopolitics was being reshaped by the rapid decolonization of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Nationalist Arab leaders rejected the plan, stating that the international community had no right to distribute any land Arabs considered rightfully theirs. Arabs launched a new wave of terror attacks on Jews, attempting to undermine the hope for stability promised by the partition plan. Pan-Arabism reached a fever pitch, and the head of the Arab League, a coalition of surrounding Arab states, warned that partition would lead to a war of annihilation.
A lot of people here don't know the stories of Mizrahim as much because they haven't been exposed to it in the same way. My family, my mother's side of the family is, I said this before, is Israeli, and I have family who were ethnically cleansed from Yemen and from Iraq, and from Spain as well earlier on. And they left and went to Israel. And a lot of families came after my family came even as well. In particular, there's a huge Moroccan population in Israel, a huge Syrian population.
Even in the face of these threats, on May 14, 1948, Israel's provisional government declared an independent Jewish state in line with the UN partition plan. The very next morning, 7 surrounding armies invaded newborn Israel. The remarkable turn of events is still talked about today. Jews successfully repelled the onslaught from the jaws of imminent destruction. But the repercussions of the invasion on both sides were devastating. The chaos of war, along with the scramble to keep civilians safe, resulted in about 700,000 Arab refugees. There is scholarly debate over what exactly happened. Some argue that Arab refugees left out of intense fear of fighting, and some argue that they left on orders from Arab leaders to make way for strategic military operations. It is clear Israelis were directly responsible for the expulsion of tens of thousands of Arabs. It was a wartime decision to ensure Arab armies didn't gain a foothold in areas where some locals had provided Arab fighters a base to launch attacks on Jewish communities since the partition plan was announced 6 months earlier. A number of towns and villages were evacuated, but most notably between 50 to 60,000 Arab residents of Lida and Ramleh, 2 towns just south of the heart of Israel's population center in Tel Aviv, were bused or walked toward the Arab Legion's front lines. In nearly every neighboring Arab country, civilian mobs directed their rage at local Jews committing waves of violence against Middle Eastern Jewish communities, some who'd been there for thousands of years. 850,000 Jews were forced out or relocated, and Israel absorbed nearly 700,000 of them.
And those families walked by foot. My family walked by foot to Jerusalem. There was no way we were walking by foot and swimming across an ocean and going to America. Like there was no place for us to go. And unfortunately, I think that the fact is, if Israel didn't exist and if in the future their anti-Zionists succeeded and Israel doesn't exist, there will be no place for a lot of Jews to go. There was no place for a lot of us to go.
Israel, whose total population doubled after the war, refused to allow back the 700,000 Arabs, either for demographic reasons or because many supported the invading Arab armies. Adding to the tragedy, Palestinian Arabs were denied absorption into the surrounding Arab states that now hosted them, becoming forced refugees, a legal status still in effect for their descendants today. Israeli leaders believed that had those Arabs been allowed to return, Israel would not be able to be both a Jewish and democratic state, and it might have a hostile population within its borders. The 150,000 Arabs who stayed now make up 20% of the Israeli population. For Palestinian Arabs, refugee status, the inability to return to their homes, and rejection by their host Arab nations stoked the flames for bitterness towards the new Jewish state. In our next episode, we'll see how the Arab situation fused into a generational hatred 20 years later when Israel was threatened with annihilation by Arab states once again.